In today's gospel, Peter has gone back to his old job, fishing. We sometimes read this as Peter going back to his old life. But it can also be read as the disciple Peter looking deep into himself, going out across the sea of his unconscious life and fishing around for the things which swim deep within us, mostly unseen. If we read it that way, we're all invited to be Peter. He's doing this at night. In John's Gospel, Nicodemus comes by night. Judas goes out into the night. Night is a symbol of dulled perceptions and closed consciousness. In the night, the disciples catch no fish. It's only in the light of Jesus that they can see clearly and life comes together. It's only then that they catch fish. And then Peter jumps into the sea. It reminds us of the burial of baptism, a full giving of oneself. But it's also about diving deeply into life, being immersed in the unconscious, seeking the Spirit deep within us. But the gospel is not merely an inner journey. So John suddenly shifts the story from the symbolism of the inner world to the pragmatism of sheep. Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. And with this choice, there is a deep challenge. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go. And then John adds, he said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. But this is also about discipleship and age. As we grow older, we learn just how much we are led. We begin to see the forces that push and pull at us and seek to lead us. Only the very fortunate young think they are free agents. Father Ron Rollheiser says that this scene in the gospel describes Peter's baptism and our own baptism as well. At this point, Peter is being conscripted, or to use church language, consecrated. To consecrate means to set aside, to displace from ordinary usage, to derail from normalcy. Long before this has to do with church buildings, with altars or chalices, it's a description of something within ordinary life. Imagine this scenario. You're on your way to meet a friend for dinner, but you witness a car accident. You're the first one on the scene. At that moment, your dinner with a friend is put on hold. You've lost your freedom, and you are by circumstance and need conscripted to remain there and help. You phone for an ambulance, you call for the police, and you wait with the injured until help arrives. During that whole time, your freedom is suspended. Well, you're still radically free, of course. You could just leave the injured to fend for themselves and head off to meet your friend, but you'd be abdicating part of your humanity by doing that. Circumstance and need have taken away your existential and moral freedom. They have consecrated you and set you apart, just as surely as a bishop's blessing sets apart a building to be a church. The building didn't ask to be a church, but now it's consecrated. It's no longer free for other usage. And so too with us. Circumstance can consecrate us and take away our freedom. You are called to serve because you happen to be there, not because you're more special or holier than anyone else. That was the case with Moses when God called him to go to Pharaoh and tell him to let God's people go. And Moses objected. Well, why me? Why not my brother? He has better leadership skills than I have. And God's answer to Moses was, very simply, because you have seen their suffering. In fact, our very notion of church draws on this concept. The Greek word ecclesia comes from two Greek words, ek and kaleo. Ek is a preposition meaning out of, and kaleo is a verb meaning to be called. To be a member of the church is to be called out of. And what are we called out of? Is our normal agenda, if we weren't conscripted by our baptism and by the demands of discipleship. Baptism and church membership consecrate us. They set us apart in the same way that Moses, having seen the sufferings of the Israelites, lost his freedom to pursue an ordinary life. In the same way as witnessing a traffic accident on the way to meeting a friend set aside our dinner plans for that night. But perhaps the best example of what church, baptism, and consecration really mean is the example of having and raising children. The home is a church, the domestic church. And so in a manner of speaking, we can say that most parents are baptized by their children and raised by them. Imagine this typical scenario. A young man and woman meet and fall in love, and they get married. At this stage in their life, they're fairly immature. Their agenda is their own happiness. They're good-hearted and sincere, but it's still because they're young, they're mostly self-centered. And then, without realizing the implications of this for their lives, they begin to have children. From the moment the first child is born, unless they're very calloused, they will, without necessarily wanting it, start to mature. What happens is that for the next 25 to 50 years, every time they turn around, a number of tiny and not so tiny hands will be stretched out, demanding something of them. Their time, their energy, their money, their car keys, their understanding, their hearts. Whether they want to or not, they will mature. For 25 to 50 years, they will be forced by clear conscription to think of others before themselves. All these years of practice will eventually pay dividends. Normally, by the time children are grown, parents are mature. And during all these years of having and raising children, in the deep meaning of these terms, parents are consecrated, displaced, and baptized. They're at the scene of an accident that has usurped their freedom and made them put their normal agendas on hold. They're asked to make sacrifices in lifestyle, career, hobbies, meals out, vacations, and so on. Their children stand before them every day, just like Jesus before Peter, and they say to them, "Do you love me?" And if the parents say yes, then biblically speaking, their children reply, "Until now, you fastened your belt and walked wherever you wanted to. But now, we are putting a rope around you and taking you where you would rather not go." Love is baptismal. Immediately upon confessing it, our freedom is derailed, and painful though it may be, we are taken by conscription into maturity. If we want freedom from being pulled around by the world, then we have to accept being bound and led by Christ. Yet this very binding might also prove to be the binding up of our wounds.